And we're on. All right. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Hope everyone's having a great week so far. My name is Heather Grant. I am one of the community admins here at the maintenance community by Upkeep. Thank you all for making the time to be with us this fine Tuesday. If you are not already a member of the maintenance community on Slack, we would love to have you join us. I will add the sign up link in the chat in the webinar in just a moment. Today, I have with me Luke Small joining us for a presentation on IIoT, Industry 4.0, digitalization, and digital transformation. I'll let Luke introduce himself in a moment, but I know we're in for a great presentation covering a wide variety of those topics today. The recording from our session will be available at this link right after we end, as well as in the maintenance community on Slack tomorrow, along with a copy of the slides that you see here today. Luke is also available in the Slack group, so please feel free to share the recording of this webinar or the invitation to Slack directly if there's any friends or colleagues who would benefit from hearing some of Luke's expertise. Last piece of housekeeping, and then we will go ahead and get started with our main event. You'll notice that your cameras and microphones are not turned on today. So what you'll do if you want to ask or answer any questions as we go throughout the presentation, please use the chat feature on the right-hand side of your screen. Feel free to send those questions as they come up throughout the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end of our time today. Anything we don't get to, we will answer offline as well. That's it from me. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Thank you especially, Luke, for making the time to join us today. And I will turn it over to you to get started.
Heather, thank you so much. And thank you for the introduction and for having us on your webinar. So Luke Small, founder of Chakra. I'm here today to talk about these 4 topics. And what I hope to do when we talk about Industry 4.0, industrial IoT, digitalization, digital transformation, is first of all kind of parse them out and give them their own space so that we can understand what they're about. But also I want to show there's a common history that ties all of these 4 topics together. And I hope by teaching people the history of each of these items, we can start to understand them better and then start to apply them better in our own jobs. So a little bit about me. So I've been doing this stuff, and when I say this stuff, I mean probably industrial automation for about 20 years. 13 of those I was with GE, and most importantly, and that was, imagine doing PLC, SCADA, big, large scale manufacturing execution systems, tying into maintenance systems, tying into ERP, tying into WMS. That was sort of my bread and butter, what I was doing at GE. And around 2016, Jeff Immelt, when he was the CEO of GE, said, we're going to digitally transform and we're going to be a leader in the digital transformation world and in the way of working. And that changed my world overnight. I went from being sort of a successful manufacturing guy inside of GE. Suddenly we were sort of almost taken over by all of these new executives from the Valley that Jeff Immelt had brought in to really lead this digital transformation. And all the rules of industrial automation, manufacturing execution, the maintenance systems I was used to working with, how we were talking to them, how we were interfacing, how we were working, suddenly seemed to change. And what I soon figured out, or it probably took me a year or so to figure out, was while it seemed like the rules had changed, what had really changed was the technology, right? The Valley was bringing new technology in, but my job, I felt, was to make that technology very real for the customers that I was looking after. So I put my hand up a few times and said, hey, I understand the shift. I understand the change. I understand the need for new technology. I understand this need for digital transformation. But I think I can make it real for our customers today. This is still when I was at GE. And put my hand up enough times that they finally put me in front of Jeff Immelt when he was the CEO. And I got to explain to him what I thought was the right vision for how we take or make the industrial internet real, make industrial IoT real. He liked the vision well enough that he sponsored myself and my team to go and try and win some new customers with his help. And one of the customers we brought in and we won with Jeff Immelt's help and his sponsorship with the C-level at this customer, which was Intel, we were able to bring them in and show, this is around 2016, 2017, show with very new industrial IoT technology that this whole digital transformation space, which I'll try and explain today, is very real. There is real benefits. We were able to put together a predictive maintenance application for Intel at the time, really early days, really duct tape and baling wire, literally in some cases, duct taping a sensor onto the edge of a tool to see how it was performing. Was able to see how it all worked. So after getting Jeff Immels's sponsorship, ran that program for 3 years, made it successful, really got to see what digital transformation when I was still at GE was all about. And at the end of that journey, made a decision that I could stay at GE and sort of run that as an executive with all the support that comes with. Or I could take everything I've learned and step outside and try and teach as many people as possible what it takes to really digitally transform. And as some of you may know, the history of GE's own digital transformation is not particularly rosy. So I got to see both the part that I led that was successful, and I got to see some of the parts that were not as successful and were really challenging for the company. And I got to see really the good, the bad, and the ugly of digital transformation. So that's where I felt I could really add value to the market. So before we jump into the details of today's presentation, I did put a challenge up on LinkedIn last week just to see how my own community would try and attempt to answer this question, which is, can you use industrial IoT, Industry 4.0, and digital transformation, which I've seen people interchange those terms, let alone use them in a sentence together. So I asked my community on LinkedIn, hey, could you use them in a sentence? My own attempt was ushering in the fourth industrial revolution will require digital transformation of industry and will leverage industrial IoT technology. So just to unpack that a little bit or highlight one thing, and this is where I'm going to really focus for Industry 4.0 when we try and define that term. Industry 4.0 sounds like a technical term, whereas in reality, what it stands for is the fourth industrial revolution. And that should be revolution with a capital R. Right, we're not talking about just technology. We're not talking about the 4.0 being the fourth iteration of manufacturing technology, which it sounds like. We're talking about a revolution, an industrial revolution on a scale that we should have recognized from our history books. So that's part of what I want to highlight on that one. So two of the best attempts that I got. The first was from Jeff Winter. So this was Industry 4.0 is a vision that requires digital transformation utilizing newer enabling technologies like industrial IoT. What I wanted to highlight on Jeff's particular post for today, or his comment, was it's a vision, right? I always joke, only engineers would try and define a revolution before it's happened. But that's what we're trying to do with Industry 4.0. It is just a vision, right? We're seeing historic level shifts across technology, economics, manufacturing, supply chain, and we're seeing black swan events like never before. We're trying to respond to that, and we're trying to build a vision for what Industry 4.0 means. So I think it's very interesting that he used the word vision, and I really like that. Giorgio, on the other hand, went a little bit more poetic. He said, industrial IoT is a catalyst for the digital transformation journey, together with process and people, will enable industries to surf the Industry 4.0 tide with style. So really nicely said. A few things I want to pick up on here with Giorgio's as kind of an introduction to what we're going to talk about today. First of all, I definitely would love to do a follow-up. We could do a whole presentation, a whole webinar on process and people and the role of process and people in digital transformation, because that's what it's all about. I don't really focus on it today. I'm trying to really parse out the different terms for today. But I'm really glad that Giorgio mentioned that. And also the catalyst word. That's what I'm going to try and do today, is show over 300-year history of this stuff. There's been catalytic, if that's a word, but moments in history that are a catalyst for change. A lot of them technology driven. In Giorgio's case, he's talking about industrial IoT being the catalyst for digital transformation. So really, really important word, and not to mention his beautiful poetic surf, the Industry 4.0 tide with style. Love that. So let's start and see if we can understand and get to a common understanding or common agreement on what is Industry 4.0. So to understand Industry 4.0, the best thing to do is go back in history to the first industrial revolution, right? What we all sort of think about as, we think about steam power, we think about coal being used to power machinery. The really big thing that was happening in Industry 1.0, or the first industrial revolution, which sounds better than what I've written here, which is Industry 1.0. Really what was happening, and the big catalyst there, was the mechanization of the textile industry. So this was the first step in really building a means of production the way we think about them today, which was mechanization. And specifically, it was mechanization, the use of machines for the textile industry. So Britain being at the center of that, the Industrial Revolution really kicking off in Britain. They had their huge empire. They had all of their colonies. They were bringing cotton back to Britain to be processed. At the time, when we talk about cottage industries today, this is literal cottage industries, people hand spinning cotton in their homes. That was the textile industry. The mechanization of that allowed Britain build the first, what we would now recognize as a factory, centralized the means of production around that factory, mechanized the means of production, and it had seismic, like epic proportion shifts to the whole economy, that movement, to a point where some economists say it impacted everything. The daily life changed, how we worked, how we went to work, how we interacted with the means of production completely changed. And some people have said that from that moment, if you put a pin in the first industrial revolution, from that moment forward, we saw the first time ever average income and average population had sustained growth from that moment on. So huge seismic revolutionary shifts, that the catalyst was that mechanization, but the impact was something altogether bigger. And that's what I want you to keep in mind when we talk about Industry 4.0. We're getting pretty good at figuring out what the catalyst is. I'll talk about those today. The impact, we're still trying to figure out, and that's always important to keep an open mind. Then we moved to Industry 2.0. So Industry 1.0 was all about mechanization, taking manual processes and using machines to operate them. The next was all about mass production. So what we would recognize, electrification, big part of it. Absolutely huge part of it was moving from steam power to electric power for manufacturing. But also the assembly line, mass production, right? You've mechanized the means of production previously, rearranging that means of production in a linear fashion. Ford, with the Model A being a classic example, arranging that in a way that you can now move down an assembly line, move down a production line, and that enables for the first time ever mass production, right? So from mechanization to mass production, that's really the second industrial revolution. So that was the catalyst, was that moving to mass production. So what was the impact? The impact was that it made goods available to people for the first time ever. So obviously the Model A had a huge impact by making the automobile available at a price point that made it more generally available than previous cars or automobiles had been able to do. It also, the second industrial revolution is credited with making the telegraph, the railroads, gas, water, and sewage generally available to the general public. So think about the impact of that at a seismic level. The third industrial revolution, so we've gone from mechanization through to mass production, and now we're going to move into automation. So around the 60s and 70s, we saw the computer age take off. We saw the microchip, semiconductors harnessed to power computers, and those computers had an impact on the shop floor. So we all recognize today when we walk the shop floor, the level of automation that we all interact with on a daily basis, PLCs, SCADA systems. That's really what the third industrial revolution brought to the shop floor. So we went from manual to mechanized to mass production, and then from mass production to automated. So that was the catalyst, was harnessing computer power on the shop floor for automation. The impact, automation itself was a big impact, but also the third industrial revolution is really credited with globalization, because the beauty, I'm not sure everyone in the Rust Belt would agree with that, that is beautiful, but the beauty of automating is also it gives you mobility with your means of production. You can move your means of production around the world. If you get your processes and your technology down, then the people you need to operate it, there's much more flexibility in where you put those means of production. So the third industrial revolution is really credited with globalization. That's the big impact that the third industrial revolution had. So what's the fourth industrial revolution? So the fourth industrial revolution, we're harnessing connected devices, data analytics, AI, cloud, social media. We're seeing the impact, and I'll talk about the catalysts in detail in a second, but we're seeing the catalysts and we're seeing all those items I mentioned, right? Connected devices, data analytics, AI, cloud, social media, having a huge impact on industry as a whole, on the economy as a whole. We're really trying to harness those catalysts and figure out what the impact will be. Like I said, only engineers will try and predict a revolution before it's happened. We don't know yet exactly what the impact of the fourth industrial revolution is going to be, but we're just trying to figure that out. So why are we trying to figure that out? Why, if you look at the history, it was every sort of 100 years we went from that big seismic shift, right? Mechanization, mass production, automation. Now we've shrunk that timeline down, and in the space of 40 years, we're now saying, oh, we're ready for a fourth industrial revolution. So why are we saying that? What's the shorter history on this? So around 2006, 2007, we entered what some computer scientists refer to as the second half of the chessboard. And what they mean by that is it goes back to a story or a fable about a chess playing king. And the king used to reward his opponents with whatever they would want if they could beat him, because he felt he was such a strong chess player. In one particular case, a visitor to his kingdom beat him and asked for rice in return, specifically to fill the chessboard with rice by putting 1 grain of rice on the first square of the chessboard, 2 on the second, 4 on the third, etc., etc. And it's really a fable about exponential growth, or you could argue it's probably even a fable about compound interest, right? But just exponential growth. And the reason we talk about the second half of the chessboard is by the time the king had placed that, whatever it was, millionth grain of rice on the first square in the second half of the chessboard, he really realized, oh man, I've made a huge error here. I haven't really had the foresight to think about the exponential growth of going from 2 to 4, 4 to 16, 16 to 32, etc., etc., etc. And he realized he was no longer the king. He had sort of dethroned himself and would have to hand over his kingdom to pay for the amount of rice that this exponential growth meant. And that's akin, or the analogy is from that to Moore's law, which governs computer power, right? So computer power has been doubling every 2 years since the 1970s, as predicted by Moore's law. And in the last 13, 14, 15 years, we've entered the second half of that exponential growth, where the doubling every 2 years is just so huge and so impactful that it's accelerating the pace of change like we've never seen it before. And that's kicked off, and we can see some of the catalytic moments that are shaping or are being shaped, by entering the second half of the chessboard as it relates to computer power, just that constant doubling every 2 years. So what are some of those big events? What are some of the historic events that led us to really coin the phrase Industry 4.0 or get worried about 4.0? So one of the big milestones as we entered the second half, of the chessboard, was 1 second. One of the catalysts for Industry 4.0 is big data analytics, AI, all kind of in one breath. And big data, the ability to do big data, if you're an industrial company or you're an enterprise company, came out of Google in a kind of a funny way. So as you probably understand, or you some people may understand, Google fundamentally just indexes the whole internet and then stores that index. So it's like having a phone book, a very, very, very fancy phone book for the whole internet. So when you type something in, it can find the right page for you, but it has to store all that information, a huge phone book that indexes the whole internet somewhere. So it developed a way of storing files, a way of storing data that was highly efficient and highly scalable. And they released that, they open sourced how they do that through a research paper that anyone was able to take and use. And in around 2006, thanks to Google open sourcing that research, we got what's called Hadoop, or the Hadoop file system, which you don't need to know what that is, but fundamentally it allows you to store loads and loads of data in an infinitely scalable way, which means if I've got a terabyte or 10 terabytes or 200, how I store it doesn't change. I just need more computers to put it on, because it allows you to distribute all of the data across multiple computers. And then if you want to ask that data a question, it'll string it back together for you so it looks seamless. So huge. That's one of the catalysts, right? We talk about mechanization. We talk about mass production. We talk about automation, the use of big data. We're still learning the impact. We're still seeing the impact, but that was one of the catalysts to Industry 4.0. Likewise, social media. Around 2006, Facebook up until then had been limited to colleges. And in 2006, Zuckerberg released that to the general public. So it really went live outside of just colleges for the first time ever. So huge. Think about how often we use social media. Think about the impact social media is having on our lives. Think about how we share information. Think about, Heather mentioned at the top of the webinar, to jump on a Slack channel, right? All of these ways of communicating that we now have, a lot of them are from this catalytic event, which was the launch of Facebook to the general public. The next catalytic event, which I think we're looking at, or I know we're looking at as we try and predict the impact of Industry 4.0, is the availability of cloud computing. So 2007, right? This is to me around the time we entered that fabled second half of the chessboard, is Amazon went live with AWS. And if you don't know the story of Amazon, it's pretty fascinating, or the story of AWS. Amazon had built internal computing services to enable their own e-commerce website. Because they'd looked at the market and not found what they'd wanted, they had to build it. So once they built it and it was working well, they said, well, why don't we make this available to the general public and sell it? And guess what? People wanted it because there wasn't what was available out there. Now there's competitors, and there was competitors back then, but for the most part, these guys are one of the forefront or foremost players in bringing cloud to the general market, and specifically to the industrial. So here's another, around 2006, 2007, a catalyst moment for the Industry 4.0 folks. And then the last big milestone was as we enter the second half of the chessboard, as computer power is just doubling at this rate that makes the rate of change so much faster, or seems so much faster. We had the iPhone released by Apple, excuse me. So think about everything we do with our phones, and I'll go into a little bit of detail on the impact the mobile phone has had on industrial IoT. But for Industry 4.0, this is one of the things we are looking at and saying, oh man, like the world is changing at a pace we've never seen before. We're seeing these catalytic events. We've now got, connected devices, data analytics, cloud, social media, mobility. They're the things that are going to be the catalysts for Industry 4.0. Now we've got to figure out what it actually means. So we've talked about the catalysts. Now let's talk about the impact that we're seeing. So about 4 years after some of these items that were released, right? We've got Amazon, AWS, we've got the iPhone, we've got Facebook, we've got big data through Hadoop. There's a prediction from Mark Andreessen, one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz, one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz, the VC firm, who said software is eating the world, or software is going to eat the world. And specifically for our world as industrials, and what he said was software is also eating much of the value chain of industries that are widely viewed as primarily existing in the physical world. So what does that mean? That's Uber, that's Airbnb, that's Netflix. These are the software-based, platform-based technology companies that for the first time ever have jumped out of the digital world into the physical and are taking over industries such as hotels, taxi cabs, video stores, getting eaten by the digital world. And this was around about the same time, interestingly enough, that prediction is made, that we see the introduction, or the first time we see this phrase coined, of Industry 4.0. So the same year as that prediction, where software is eating the world, and we're seeing industries getting massively impacted by the 4 catalytic events I mentioned earlier, Industry 4.0 is coined out of a German government-sponsored high-tech strategy project focused on computerization of manufacturing. So again, this is engineers trying to predict the impact. I'd argue probably a little bit late. I think this has been quite reactive, and when we talk about digital transformation in a second, we'll talk about what that specifically means. So that's Industry 4.0, and hopefully I've given you a flavor of, if you think about revolutions having a catalyst and an impact, the history, what the catalysts that we can look back at, and the impact that it has. We're starting to see the catalysts. We understand the catalysts for Industry 4.0. We're starting to see the impact all around us, and I think we're trying to play catch up as an industry to focus on it. But that's really the lesson on Industry 4.0, fourth industrial revolution, focused on connected devices, data analytics, AI, cloud, and social media. So what about industrial IoT? If that's the fourth industrial revolution, what does industrial IoT mean? So we go back to the iPhone, the release of the iPhone in 2007, a catalytic event for industrial IoT. And why is that? The reason it really started the whole industrial IoT movement was what's inside of any cell phone or mobile phone. Think about an arms race. Think about everyone trying to catch up with Apple. Think about BlackBerry trying to survive. Think about the Android devices trying to catch up or play for market share against Apple. There was a huge consumer electronics explosion around the same time, excuse me, that the iPhone was released. Everyone's trying to catch up, stay abreast of Apple's developments, and win their technology orders. Think about all that technology. Think about all the stuff that's on your phone. Think about batteries, sensors, cameras, GPS units, the user experience, your touch screen, your facial recognition, your thumbprint recognition, and take them all out of the phone for a second and start putting them into other devices, putting them into doorbells, baby monitors. That's IoT. That's where IoT came from. Again, trying to link back that history between industrial IoT and Industry 4.0. But it all came from taking the guts of a mobile phone, the arms race in consumer electronics and consumer electronic devices and support parts, that's what we're looking for, and putting them into other devices and creating a whole new industry, which was IoT, or a whole new market, which is IoT. Industrial IoT, IIoT, is just taking those same devices, taking them out of a mobile phone, taking those same parts, reconfiguring them, and putting the same technology back onto the shop floor. So the example here would be, Google taking some of the learnings from AlphaGo, the machine learning platform, and applying it to achieving 15% energy savings inside of a building system. So then what about digital transformation? If that's all fine, what about digital transformation? So remember, 2011, the German working group comes up with the phrase and tries to save, I guess, manufacturing, tries to get out ahead of the changes that are happening. Unfortunately, and Warren Buffett's credited with spotting this first, or highlighting it first, by 2017, the top 4 to 5 companies by market capitalization in America were no longer industrial companies. They were all technology companies. That's scary. And what he means here by it doesn't take any money to run them is that the top companies by valuation used to be industrials, and industrial companies, if you're making a gas turbine or if you're an oil refinery, the capital barrier to entry to get into that market is through the roof. If you want to start a tech startup, the capital barrier to entry, again, thanks to the catalysts I mentioned earlier, the big one being cloud computing, are very, very low. There's no real capital needed to get into this market. There's no real capital needed to start a Google or start a Netflix. You need money to cover expenses, but you're not buying big, heavy capital equipment, which is a very different game to be in. That scares a lot of the companies. It scared the company I worked for at the time. It scared GE. I think it scared Jeff Immelt in a positive way. And he said, because these catalytic events are happening, because we're seeing the impact of connected devices, data analytics, cloud, social media, and we're now starting to see the impact. We're starting to see the impact of the valuation of our industrial companies go down compared to tech companies. We can no longer be an industrial company. This is what he said. He said, we need to be more like Oracle. We need to be more like Microsoft. Unfortunately, getting away from your core and trying to copy the technology companies, and yes, this is a photograph of a dumpster fire, trying to copy the technology companies that were leading the charge with all of these new catalysts is not a particularly good idea. So what a lot of companies did, and I call it the first wave of digital transformation, is focus too much on digitization. So digitization, one of the terms I said I'd define for today, digitization or digitalization, some people separate the two. I keep them the same. Digitalization is taking a process, good, bad, or indifferent, and applying digital technology to it. Hopefully you make the process better, but maybe you don't. And the first wave, because I'd argue we're behind the 8 ball, we're trying to get out ahead of the impact of these catalytic events. We focus too much on digitalization, and we try and copy technology companies. We try and be like technology companies rather than trying to reinvent ourselves as something new in the digital age. And there is a huge failure rate. That first wave, which is around 2017 to 2020 of digital transformation, is, I think, 75% failure rates for that first 4 years, which is epic. So what about digital transformation? Or in this particular slide, I've even crossed it out and said, is digital transformation the right phrase? Maybe we should be talking about business transformation. But basically, the way to think about digitization versus digital transformation is digitization has relatively low business impact and requires relatively low maturity. Digital transformation, which to me is you're creating net new revenue or net new value for your company, or you're exchanging net new value with your customers. That's digital transformation enabled by digital technology. And what happened after we tried to play catch up with those catalytic events, everyone focused heavily on digitization. Oh man, we've got to be like the tech companies. We've got to be like Google, Apple, Facebook, Netflix. It led to huge digital overload where people fell off a cliff, were too busy trying to play catch up and weren't able to start to recognize the benefits or see the benefits of true digital transformation. Again, digital transformation being, to me, or my definition of that, you're going after net new revenue or net new value that you weren't able to unlock before without digital technology. So now, hopefully, we've had that 300-year timeline. We've gone from mechanization to mass production to automation. We're now seeing the impact of big data, cloud, connectivity, social media, on the economy as a whole. Industrial companies are losing value, which is scary. We've spent probably 4 years trying to digitally transform to a vision that's copying those tech companies that are winning those top spots in terms of valuation. That hasn't worked. So now what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing some hope here, is that wave 2 focuses on net new value or revenue, which is digital transformation. And that, to me, if we can get that correct, that sounds to me like a 4th industrial revolution. So if you want to learn more, if these topics were interesting to you, I do have a short and sweet masterclass. It is for everybody. The feedback I always get is, oh, I'm not sure if this was for me. It's for everybody. And it goes through some of these topics in much more detail. And it's, if you go to decodedtransformation.com, DECODED, transformation.com, you can sign up. It's free. I won't spam you, don't worry. And I'll make sure we get this link shared out on the community as well. And with that, I'll hand over for any Q&A.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely get that link sent out along with the copy of the slides too. Thank you, Luke, for walking us through that. It was really interesting, kind of going down, seeing how kind of history happened and then how it's appearing again in life today. Waiting for any questions to come through in the chat. My question for you is, of these 4 kind of big bucket topics, which are the 2 that kind of get confused or mixed up the most? And then if it's different, which are the 2 that are, for lack of a better word, the most dangerous to mix up? Not necessarily like dangerous in a threatening situation, but which is the kind of most harmful of a mix up, if that works.
Yeah, so it's a great question. And the reason I started my own company was because digitalization and digital transformation were getting mixed up all the time. And people were expecting transformative results, that huge seismic impact, from doing basic digitization or digitalization. And again, we can argue if there are different terms or not, but I'm not stressed about confusing those 2. I'm stressed about confusing the other 2. What was your question?
Which are maybe the most harmful if they get mixed up? I'm trying to come up with a better word than dangerous, but like, what's the risk for 2 getting kind of mixed up, if different than those 2?
Yeah, I think it's the same 2, and the risk if you mix them up is that you miss expectations. And if you miss expectations enough times, people lose faith, and suddenly digital transformation is a dirty word, whereas it should be a really positive thing.
Yeah. Rasmus in the chat says, so when we're collecting data blindly without a clear plan on how it should help, then we're just getting more confused.
Yeah, exactly. And there's actually, I had a great debate on LinkedIn yesterday about this, about going after the data first. I think there is some there's unified data visibility is a buzzword, or buzzwords that are floating around at the moment that I'm interested to learn more about. I have a call actually in the coming days to learn more about that topic. So I think our ability to go after data will get smarter. But yes, for the most part, if we're just doing digitalization and just going after data for data's sake, that leads to those dangerous situations you mentioned.
Awesome. So we got a few questions in kind of all at once here. I'll start here. It says, what do you believe are the main objectives of digital transformation in the field of maintenance and asset management?
Yeah, great question. For me, and I just came off a huge 2-year project where we did this with one of the big machine builders in Europe, one of the multi-billion-dollar machine builders in Europe. In our world, maintenance and asset management, it's moving to outcome as a service. So today, if you buy a machine from an OEM, put it on the shop floor, when it breaks, they come and service it. We want to transform that market from that position to you never buy a machine again. If that machine is meant to put lids on bottles, you buy X number of lids, or you buy uptime, or you buy throughput from that machine builder in the future, they think they own the asset forevermore. Also, in our world at the moment, with sustainability top of mind for all the right reasons, that's been proven to be a much more sustainable model from a supply chain perspective.
Really interesting. Next question here says, what about the school of thought that digital transformation is not about technology?
Oh, yes. So can you see my poster? That's probably too small. Yeah,
small.
that's exactly what it says. This poster right here says digital transformation is not about technology. So I am a huge proponent of that school of thought. And it's intentionally tongue-in-cheek because you need the technology. What it's trying to say is you can't start with the technology, right? That's what that famous first wave dumpster fire was all about. Looking for problems when you've got technology to go after them with, versus understanding what your needs are and then applying technology where it makes sense.
Awesome. Another question on digital transformation, and then I'll go back to the one above it. It says, could digital transformation replace human judgment or decision making? I think we hear that question come up a lot in conversations about machine learning and AI.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guess they're referring to machine learning or AI. Yeah, I think it's tricky. I think you've got to parse out that question and what level of decision making are we talking about, right? Because if you go from manual to mechanized, from mechanized to mass production, from mass production to automation, let's not even get into digital transformation. Let's just stay in the 1980s, and you're handing more and more control over to the machines at the time, right? So that's already happened. I think it's a matter of, as AI advances, as we've got more data to play with, we've got to have probably an ethical conversation about what decisions are made by the AI or what decisions are made by humans. I think most of the research we see says it's both, but it's always important to go back in history because we've already ceded so much control to, and the machines aren't scary, right? A die press is not a scary piece of machine that's going to come after you like Terminator, but we've already ceded control and decision making. Even in a PLC, we do that today, right?
Yeah. Really interesting. Yeah, that's kind of in line with what I've been hearing. It's more of looking like they're going to continue to be complementary, at least in the near and midterm. We're not really anywhere near replacement, is what I've heard. So cool. Next question here says, today manufacturing industries are heavily investing in Industry 4.0 and digital transformation, but also demanding ROI. How do you calculate or how do you approach ROI?
Yeah, so the first thing we did, so we moved, and we didn't get them all the way there, but after 2 years, we're much closer to moving this huge company to outcome as a service rather than selling assets. The first thing you do and how you approach that is you've got to sit down with the CFO or the finance executive who's responsible for the project, responsible for funding it, and have a conversation around what do you mean by ROI? And because of the work that we were doing at the time, we were able to change the metrics, right? We were changing a business from, we sell you an asset and when it breaks, we fix it, or when it breaks, you hopefully call us, to we never sell you an asset again. That sort of seismic shift, if you try and do the ROI on that today, it would look awful. What we tried to do was go and say, okay, well, what tells us we're doing this correctly? What are the leading edge indicators? What are almost like the predictive indicators that tell us we're doing this correctly? And for the first year or two, get those as your metrics and start to take them off and get finance to come on board with you.
Kind of all about going back to that first question that we discussed there, managing expectations and finding alignment, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Really cool. We got a philosophical question that just came in. Feel free to, answer to the extent that you wish, but what's your take on ethical issues surrounding the acceptance of digitalization?
Yeah, I was actually riding my mountain bike last week, which is a rare occurrence, but I was lucky enough to get out my bike, and that's where I think philosophically. And there was a TV show, I forget which one it was, where the daughter in the TV show approaches her dad and talks about transhumanism, and he's kind of half paying attention, like the teenage daughter, crazy thoughts, not going to stress about it. And she basically says, "No, I'm going to upload myself to the computer, to the net. I'm no longer going to exist. My body will no longer exist." So my only thoughts on it is that I was thinking about it as a parent, and I've got a young son and a young daughter, and I was like, man, the rate of change is so fast, like we talked about today. The kind of problems, the kind of questions that are going to come, the way in which we used to laugh at our dads, or I used to laugh at my dad playing Mario Brothers and trying to use the controller to jump Mario over the next hurdle. It's going to be so different. It's going to be such an epically different world in 20 years, hopefully for the positive. And I think personally, I'm not a fan of transhumanism, but I get it. And I think we should all take a step back from the technology. If you want to read, I'll give a book recommendation to answer that question, actually.
Yeah,
if I can find it. If you want to learn more about that and protecting yourself in the future, if you can read that out, or we put it on the chat later.
Yeah.
We put it on this Slack channel later, but that just talks about 9 rules for humans to survive in the age of automation. That's probably the best transhumanism book I've read, if that can help.
Cool. Really interesting. All right. Well, that's all the questions I see in the chat. Any final thoughts or anything, maybe how to get in touch with you best, Luke?
Yeah, best way, you can see me there, LUKESMAUL. Best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I tend to be super active there. Go take the masterclass, find me on LinkedIn, say hello, and join the conversation. And yeah, I'll be active on the Slack channel, after this too.
Perfect. Rupesh is looking forward to more information about smart manufacturing. So we'll save that for the next time, or Rupesh, feel free to ping Luke directly and get some more details there. Thank you again for making the time today. I appreciate your sharing, Luke, and thank you everyone for joining us. I will see you all next time. Have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you. Bye-bye.